All right, today on the workbench we have a Gibson ES339. We're going to pop this case open in just a second, but the case is really clean. I believe the seller said this is a 2017 version. So the case is in excellent condition. It's not a locking case. The case is in very nice condition. Let's pop this open. Get our first hands-on glimpse of this. All right, cherry finish, some swirl pickguard scratches on the pickguard itself. I love the block inlays on these style of instruments. So first impressions is that it's in very nice condition. He did mention that there was something that he referred to as a touch-up around the nut, so let's get this out of the case and let's take a closer look. Alright, so the seller mentioned that there was some touch-up around the nut, and I don't know what he meant by that. So let's get a look at that. It looks like it's pretty clean. Looks like it's in pretty good condition. I don't see any issues there. Look at what we call the treble end here. I don't see any issues there. This little bit of shaping and texture, there's nothing terribly abnormal about that. Those look to be some scraping marks just from removing color right in here. So there's no touch up there. On the base side, there are some lines on the end of the nut right in here, and that can just be the grain of the bone material that they use. Right in here, there's some red marks, and that's not touch up. It's a little low spot right here, which again doesn't look like a touch up. Just looks like a low spot from scraping. I'm not sure what that is. Maybe that's what he was referring to right there, but it's not a chip. That's still factory finish. The red marks here, that's not touch up. That is where you spray your color on. You spray your lacquer toner on it, and you can see there's lacquer toner over the end of the nut right at the bottom of it. And then even if you tape off the binding, you come back and you scrape that finish, and it just looks like they missed a little bit of the red lacquer toner. So that's not a touch-up. That's just something that they left behind at the factory, and when you're trying to make enough of these to keep the lights on, I suppose some of these things get missed, but nothing that causes me a terrible amount of concern there. Front of the headstock looks pretty nice and clean. Back of the headstock looks nice and clean. There's no crack of any kind, no break, no problems there. There's no marks in the lacquer from any sort of rubber hanger. So if you have any old rubber hangers and have a nitrocellulose finish, you don't want to combine those. Okay, looking at the fret condition, in that first position where there's often fret wear from people plunking on cowboy chords, that looks good. So the first position's in good shape. All the rest of the frets are in good shape. No major issues with the pickups. Just needs to be wiped down and cleaned up. So all in all, it's pretty nice. Pretty nice and clean. Let's get a look at the back. Took a quick peek of the back before of the headstock. Again, no cracks or any issues there. So far I don't see any chips or dings. Just some light dust. I think it's time to plug it in and give this thing a listen. Make sure the electronics are working as they should. And then I'm going to measure the fret height. And I'm going to measure the neck thickness. This has a 50s style neck, at least from the initial feel of it, pulling it out of the case. It doesn't feel excessively huge though. It feels pretty nice. So we'll get a test run on it and make sure the electronics work. Let's give it a listen. What we're going to use for that is just a little MojoTone Tweed Champ kit build that I did some 3-4 years ago. So nothing fancy there. But we're just going to verify that the electronics work as they should and don't need any cleaning and nothing is cutting it. So I want to take some measurements of this neck, and a lot of times at the factory or looking up things online, you'll see measurements for the 1st fret and for the 12th fret. I pull it at the 3rd and the 9th because the neck is usually pretty darn straight in that vicinity. And so if I have a guitar that I really like and I want to know what the thickness is and maybe I want to build something, at least to the thickness specs, that's where I'll pull the measurements from. I'll pull them from the 3rd and the 9th and not the 1st. And the reason why is the neck will start to get thicker somewhere between the 2nd fret and the nut. And this one doesn't look too bad. You can see it gets thicker right there. But I always pull my measurement right behind the fret, so at least I have a fixed point of reference that I'm butting up to with my caliper. And so I don't know if this one will be that way, so I'm going to take measurements at the 1st, the 3rd, the 9th, and the 12th, just as a reference, so I can list it either way. And to do that, just got a plastic caliper that I've modified like this, and that way it can fit right between the strings. I'm going to pull these measurements and write them down. And then at the 9th, so 50's measurements, but boy, it doesn't feel excessively thick to me. Next thing I want to check is the fret height. And a lot of times when you see guitars listed for sale, the seller will say, oh, there's plenty of fret life left. And it's okay. There's nothing wrong with that because they maybe don't have any way of measuring it. And I've got 49 thousandths, just about 49 thousandths there. So the fret height here is about 49 thousandths. And when you're looking at guitars, you know, old vintage guitars had lower fret crowns. They might be 30 thousandths tall, maybe even less, depending. But nowadays, 40 to 45 thousandths is fairly standard. Gibson usually has 45 to 55 in that range. You get into the Dunlop 6105 fret wire, and it's about 55 thousandths tall from the manufacturer. And depending upon how they go in, you have to level them a little bit. So it looks like they took maybe a couple thou off of the original fret height of 50 thou. They're in good shape. Let's check it for rocking and see how that goes. Right now, my instincts are saying that I'm going to lubricate the nut slots and check the intonation, and then I'm going to do the photography and get this thing up for sale. So I'm going to repeat this all the way up the neck. So far, no fret rocking. That's a good sign. All right, so there's nothing wrong with those frets. There are a couple things that I'm going to end up doing here. I'm going to end up lubricating these nut slots, and for years I would just use a graphite pencil, you know, just pencil lead, and just kind of put that in the slot, and you got to kind of tap it down in there as you get to these plain strings because it'll kind of grind up the graphite, and most of the graphite will end up sitting on top of there. And, you know, it gets a little bit messy, and sometimes you get kind of that graphite gray dust packed into the nut, so it doesn't always look the best. And then if you get in there and try to erase it, sometimes you get some eraser chunks down in the slot. So I've gone to using the Big Ben's nut sauce, and it comes in a small tube and a couple little applicators. And so I'll move the string out of the way and just put a tiny drop in there, and then I'll move it around a little bit with the applicators. And that just allows the strings to move. As you bend, the strings are moving slightly back and forth. If you have a vibrato, it's even more exaggerated. But that movement in the slot, if it's getting bound up and pinched in there, will cause tuning problems. I've had people over the years want new tuning machines installed, and it's not really maybe the issue. The issue is the nut slots need to be cleaned, maybe recut slightly. If there's enough height above the frets, you can clean them up and recut them. And sometimes it's just as simple as putting some type of lubricant in there, and there's a lot of different ones on the market. I really like the Big Ben's It works really well. And then that just allows that string to slide as you're bending. It can just move back and forth ever so slightly. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to check the intonation. I'm going to do the photography, and I'm going to get this thing up for sale. To lubricate the slots, and you can do this one string at a time. You don't have to detune all of them. But I just want to slack them a little bit. Just a little bit of the material in the slot. Work it around a little bit. Just a little bit. And sometimes I won't even slack the strings. I'll just lift them straight up out of there. So just a little bit of crud in there. I don't want to file on it if I don't have to. You want to be careful if you do that you don't slap the side of the neck with that string, especially if it's up to pitch. So if you have to bring the string off the edge of the neck, it's a good idea to slack that tension so you don't scratch the finish up. So that's just going to allow the string to move in that slot. I think from here I'm going to tune it back up, check the intonation, and this thing is ready for photography. Alright, there's one more thing that I want to do as I was working on the intonation, is I like to tension the tuning machines. If there happens to be a screw on top of the button, there's usually a Teflon washer and a little spring steel in there that allows the button to be tighter or looser, and it seemed like there was just a little bit of play in there. I'm just going to snug that up so it feels a little bit more solid as you're tuning the strings. Just a little detail, just gives it a little bit more solid feel. And that's it. This one is done.